talk about these kinds of issues. I prefer more general ones, but I've read this document that I'm going to refer to, and I found it very interesting. And I've written something about this. I've got some copies here, and the reason why that website address is there is because you can download my paper there as well. The first point for me is I can't imagine that anybody has not been aware of this issue given the media coverage of recent weeks and months, and I very much suspect we're going to see an extraordinary amount of coverage of this issue in time to come. So I very much suspect also that we're going to get counted into conversations about where detached youth work might play a role in this. And I think there's some interesting things to learn from what we know so far. So certainly in terms of the theme of our conference, working with young people on the fringes, what does it mean to work on the fringes? We're talking about a group in particular where that resonates. Now, the document I'm referring to is this one. I can give you all the references, most of them on the internet, so they're very readily accessible. The independent inquiry into child sexual exploitation in Rotherham. But what you will see is it's over an extraordinary period of time, a long time. I spent a lot of time this weekend talking about time, short-term work, in philosophy we call it temporalities, how time works. I'm going to make some points about temporalities that I think come out of this document. This document has got all politicians in the country and beyond thinking about this issue. And in a strange way, I think it creates a few very interesting opportunities for detached youth work. It is, as they say, a mighty tool. But it's written by somebody who knows how to write, Alexis J. Somebody who, when you read it, you understand that she spent a lot of time in the field, on the street, as a social worker in Scotland, before she became an esteemed professor and whatever else. I get that from reading this. So I think it's a very honest report, and I say again, I think it's a very interesting one. Now, whilst it draws attention to frankly, the horrors of all this, it does, I think, provide an extraordinary insight into what does work, good practice. That's why I think it's important. And what do you get when you read it? It starts coming out. The very stuff that many of us here have spoken about for a long time, it emerges as not just part of good practice, but essential to good practice. The stuff about relationships, the stuff about low threshold practices, making services accessible to people. So it speaks to a particular vision of detached youth work that many of us hold dearly. So outreach work and detached youth work comes out really positively in this, despite those horrors. It's full of stuff about what worked and what was working, and the constraints on actually work that was good. So you need to look at all these different levels to understand what has been going on here. It's an irony that at the end of this period, there's evidence that this earlier good practice starts to disappear, just when it was working really effectively. So we have to ask some questions about that. There's an extraordinary amount of stuff in there about the management of services and the political frameworks in which we work. It comes also, following on very quickly afterwards, with this document. I think I had a copy of that, yeah. Real Voices, again, quite an expensive one, but a very interesting one for youth workers, because it's got real voices of young people in it. That's a different area, in this case Greater Manchester. Anne Coffey is the MP for Stockport, and she's been working on this stuff for a long time. So that's worth reading as well. Now that particular report, there's the headline in the paper, Child sexual exploitation, normal. Normal in parts of Greater Manchester. If you were to read Alexis Jay's report, I think it was normal in a lot of places, certainly in Rotherham. But in combination, we can be under no illusion as to the realities here and the scale and extent of this thing. And that's quite important. I mean, I've just been involved in a discussion about how often things happen. Now, it's true. These things, in the big scheme of things, don't happen that much. But they happen more than we think. That's certainly true as well. So when things become normalised, for me, it just becomes even more terrifying. And, well, I have been concerned about the number of people who have told me that in some neighbourhoods, this has become the new social norm. Now, that's just my little bit of new technological understanding, where you see how it's like got that shadow around it. Don't worry, you won't have to read everything, just read the bits that have got a shadow around them. Yeah? I've read it all, it took me 10,000 hours to read it, but just read the bits of the shadows around them. Right? So, what you've also got here, look, have we not talked about this? Adults allowing young people into their houses. We've talked about the depopulation of the street. You know, the move them on policies of the antisocial behaviour agenda. And what did we warn? What did detached youth workers bear witness to? There were people there sensing an opportunity. Well, if the old bill are telling you to move off the street, come in my house. Yeah? Of course, if it's from detached youth workers, it's only anecdote. But now it's bloody evidence, right? It's evidence. So to be clear, some of the things that we've been saying, this document represents an evidence base of that into the arms of Jade's report, the other one, young people talk about running the gauntlet. I mean, it's pretty full on, is that? Yeah? There's all that stuff in there about taxis. Young people say, you're having a laugh. Going in a taxi, no chance. But then, of course, the consequence is we have to run the gauntlet at the bus station when all these people are waiting for us. Some amazing testimony. And that's the point about scale. From, frankly, an institution, the police, who for a long time, the evidence shows, weren't right bothered. The irony of me saying that is that the police are probably more bothered than anybody now. So they've changed. Actually, the evidence shows that the higher management of the local authorities and our services, they're the ones who are lagging behind. So they need to have a good look at this out. Now this dude comes up. Anybody know who he is? I think he's clever. His name.
Sean. Sean.
Right now, Sean Wright, he spent a lot of time in the press getting language that I learned in the East End of London, a right caning. Yeah? And some people would say rightly so, but I think there's some complexity to that. He was the lead member of Children's and Young People's Services in the borough before he became the Police and Crime Commissioner. So that period of time, he was there for an awful lot of it. That's interesting. Now, I want to say that it's interesting to look at the media coverage of what's happened since these reports have come out, because we have seen almost all of them targeted, there's another word, at certain individuals. Joyce Thacker, head of social services, she's lost a job, and we all go, what do you like? They deserve to lose the job, don't they? You know, the National Front, they went after in big style, resign now. And I think there's something interesting about that actually when it comes down to it, we find a few individuals to pick off. I'm concerned that in picking off the individuals, some of which, you know, some of whom probably need to lose their jobs, but focusing only on that, it diverts us from a wider understanding of what's happening here. And if you want to read about the impact of cutbacks and austerity on services, this is another report to read. So I want to say that this guy's got some responsibility, but the people who made the decisions about slaughtering public services have got some responsibility also. Because in these places, they're working on half the teams that they need. And those people are working double shifts. But of course we all hate social workers, don't we? Yeah? I do want to say, however, that the level of irresponsibility at the highest of tiers is extraordinary also. I'm going to mention that. And I'm interested in all that, of course, because that is, as ever, something about how power works. Now, did I do it again? There you go. You just did one word for you this time. Exaggerated. What you've got for a long time is the testimony of the outreach workers. What's significant about this report is that the people who were frontline, they weren't social workers. The people who were right up close to this issue, they were youth workers, not social workers, youth workers. And their testimony was considered by all and sundry at the highest of levels to be exaggerated. So they went to meetings and they said, you know what, this is happening, you're exaggerating, mate. You're exaggerating. The people who knew young people well were said to be exaggerating. Alexis J says that was one of the crimes, not to believe those people. So we have a kind of a chain of disbelief. We've got lots of people, particularly in the early days of the police, not believing young people. Being under no illusion, young people who were affected by this made disclosures, went to the police, and they were told to go away. Right? They were not believed. And those who stood in witness of them, as advocates of them, youth workers in particular, were similarly disbelieved. And this report vindicates them as telling the truth of what happened. It seems that the people on high had other priorities, not least how the borough looked in the league tables, how many stars it had, meet its performance criteria, and so on, and so on, and so on. Which, as we know well, you can go up the tables, but you don't actually do anything about the problem, if you know how data works. So, moving on quickly, right? During the inquiry, senior managers in children's social care comprised this problem. It was a small problem. This is a direct quote. Agencies need to retain a sense of proportionality with regard to CSE, as it only actually accounts for 2.3% of the safeguarding work that goes on. He took a police officer, that's the last sentence. It may be that only 2% of referrals are about this, but the risk of serious injury and harm to those individuals is just out of all proportion to what it is to be considered neglected. You know, you have to go back for the week or something, right? So you can't just do the numbers. You just can't say, well, we've got 100 kids, so they all deserve equal attention. It's not like that. If 2 of them are going to get murdered tomorrow, we need to put a few more extra resources into that, don't we? And that's not what was happening. Does more mean just more numbers? No, it doesn't. So, this is what you get. It's fantastic, isn't this? These are the kind of things. When I read this, I thought, you know what, I've heard this. It's like the voices of the big boys around the table. Oh, well, the victim invited sex by the way they dressed. They had a short skirt on, they deserved it. This is testimony. This is in the minutes. Right?
Judges were giving rapists half sentences if a young woman...
Well, you see, so what you're getting at here is how the attitudes of power work. Do you know what I mean? They didn't complain, so what's the issue? Do you know what I mean? They don't remember consistently what was going on, so how can you believe them? These are senior people who said these in meetings. You know, they're just having a laugh. You know, it doesn't happen in BME communities. You never get, Asian people affected by this. Yeah, right. Yeah. There's always physical evidence. Yeah, right. Yeah. And it goes on and on and on. The level of awareness about this is just, it defies belief. And therein the conflation between the historical view that young people affected by this were child prostitutes. Yeah? The conflation of, if I can get the words accurate, I don't want to mess it. Sexual abuse. The conflation of sexual abuse and child sexual abuse. That's quite interesting. Because for a long time, in policy and in law, everybody who was involved in this, it was dealt with under the regime of child prostitution. Now we see child prostitution and child sexual exploitation as something different, thankfully. Right? Thankfully. And we've had our awareness of this broadened with the input of the men's room. But you can put it in a sentence. A refusal at a wider political level to confront the state's virtual abandonment of these children as lives with little or no value. That's a good word. I like that word. I've always liked that word because it means something. And it means something different from things that you can count. Coffee, back to coffee. Said police, social workers, prosecutors and juries are often inherently, albeit unconsciously, prejudiced against young people, especially vulnerable teenagers. I mean, if you go to the stats, if you've got 13,000 cases and only 1,000 people get lifted, something going on, isn't there? Something going on. So we might well spend a second thinking about what it is to be unconsciously prejudiced. To be prejudiced without knowing we are. Because that's where some of this stuff, we have to take it on the chin. We have to think, hang on a minute, this could be us here. And I found something from the night, I've got copies of this as well if you're interested to read a bit. This is from the 1970s. And as they say, a lot of good things in the 1970s and the 60s as well. We've tried to get rid of them. You know what I mean? And this was got rid of as a theoretical framework for understanding how power works in the world. I mean, anybody ever heard of childism as a concept? Anybody? No, I haven't until recently. But when I read this, I just thought, there's some stuff that was written in the 70s. My God, we need to read it again. We need to read it again. So I'm going to spend just a minute thinking about what childism means. And there's one bit from Pearson and Alan. I think it's Alan. Some credit there. Childism is the automatic presumption of superiority of any adult over any child. It results in adults' needs, desires, hopes and fears taking unquestioned precedence over those of the child. Have we not talked about that these last few days as well? Now, again, the temporal aspect is, well, perhaps it existed in the 70s, but it doesn't exist now. But then I read the paper, tell you every now and again, Jake Chapman, a big artist in the country, taking children to galleries at a waste of time. I mean, sounds like I'm going off on a tangent. But I wondered, having read Pearson Allen, I thought, fucking hell, he's childist. Do you know what I mean? Do you know what he said? Children are not human yet. He's an artist. He's an artist. Well, that's important. I'll come to that in a second. And then, somebody sent me this. I have to repeat that. Somebody sent me this. I don't generally read the Daily Hyde. And so this Shona Sibari, a liberal parent from middle-class British society who tried to be a liberal parent, tried to be respectful of her children's opinions and choices and whatever, and of course it failed. And now she's going to bin all that. From this day forth, my children will do what they're told because I told them to, whether they like it or not. The death of liberal parenting as advocated by Sean and Sibali. Now, I very much suspect that both of them are trying to get a rise, as they say, where I come from. Yeah, trying to get a bit of publicity. Yeah, agent provocateur. Yeah, but I think the point still stands. So, in Pace's paper, there's a little story, right? I might go to those bits now. Right? Two neatly dressed, polite sub-teens, American teenagers, two neatly dressed sub-teenagers enter a restaurant for lunch, or dinner where I come from, right? The waitress dallies at another table, talking with a male customer, and she takes the order from a couple of young adults who were seated after the children, all with graciousness and civility. Finally, she takes the order from the youngsters, and her manner subtly changes. She seems more preoccupied, neutral, if not actually unfriendly. She throws the menu at them and says, "What do you want?" before they have time to deliberate. As she brusquely takes their order, she asks tersely, "Do you kids have money?" Only two kids in the shop at once. Right? When she serves her other two tables, she's again charming and grateful. When the food for the youngsters arrives, she spills it as she shoves it towards them. Right? I mean, a million miles away from child sexual exploitation, but perhaps something childish in it, in the sense that, you know, assumed superiority in the sense that, well, why do you want to believe them? They're just kids out. You know what I mean? Right? And therefore, all those behaviours are kind of reasonable. So, there we have it. The pejorative acts. So now I'm wearing a pop at your lot, and myself. These children have not been physically assaulted. They have, however, been subject to a number of pejorative acts. The posture, gestures, tone of voice, and in this case, the way the menu and food were handled. So, you know, can we catch ourselves there? Can we be conscious of that? Our gesture and tone, I had a wonderful conversation yesterday where one of our colleagues here was saying, you don't have to say anything for them to get the message of what you think is right and wrong. And I've been thinking about that a lot. I think about a lot of things a lot, unfortunately. But so there you are at the end. Look, let me read the sentence. It's important. Yet, in all probability, these youngsters receive the same gratuitously abusive behaviour many times a day from loving parents, devoted teachers, kindly physicians, concerned policemen, considerate shopkeepers, and caring youthworkers. Sorry, I haven't that word. Right? You get the point, right? Can you catch yourself? Back to Rotherham, yeah? This is where I go in a different direction now, looking at the evidence of what was working well. And there's a youth work project, founded a long time ago, based on this. Its relationship with any young person who's voluntary on both sides. That sounds like something from the 70s as well, doesn't it? You know what I mean? But this project comes out extraordinarily well. Those that disbelieved it and the testimony that it brought forward don't come out very well at all. It is an extraordinary testimony to a particular form of youth work and the people who were supported by it. Yeah, nobody understood me, but these guys did. They were helpful and trustworthy. You don't listen to me. You need people who are trained to understand the issues, to be aware of them, and get stuck in earlier. There should be more people like this who you can trust to talk to. Because Coffee's report especially, I ain't talking to teachers, you're having a laugh. I ain't talking to this person, I ain't talking to that person. Well, who would you all talk to? Says Coffee. And who's banging on the top of the list again? It's the youth workers. But only when the youth workers work in a particular way, it seems. Now that's also interesting to me, being helpful. Because sometimes we disregard, I think, perhaps in this childish way, just what important doing something practical can be. Creating access to a washing machine, you know, in a drop-in centre, for somebody who can't get their clothes washed very regularly. Practical stuff that consolidates who we are and what we're trying to do. So very important to creating the landscape in which it's possible for young people to trust us and then perhaps for them to disclose these realities in the belief that we're going to support them in bringing them forward, potentially even into the criminal justice system, which is critical to my point about temporalities. You do your work, support and remember disclosure. That's the beginning. You know, there are so many of these cases that come to court and they never got through because there was nobody there to go through the whole process with them. Ken's done this work, following people through, supporting them all the way through the processes. And we have to have the resources and the temporalities in which that is possible. Unless, of course, we find other more creative ways of dealing with child sexual exploitation. This is, I hesitate to call it my favourite example of what we've dreamed up, the dealing with child sexual exploitation. Just chuck them in prison. And if you really want to have your toes curled, read the testimony of those who, and I'm not ruling this out by any stretch of the imagination, but in a lot of places, you know what, just put them in the nick. I mean, we know they're not criminals, but at least they will become victims of these bad people. Just lock them up. And we have got unprecedented numbers compared to our past of young people incarcerated for their own safety. You know, just read the references. Better not leave that over too frightening. Now, my point also is that, again, this comes home to roost in terms of our realities. And if we were to take this theoretical framework of childism, we might actually observe its, you know, its presence in all sorts of places. I think I showed this to a few of you before. But I wrote this having read Youth Matters some years ago. And I went through it and found all the stuff that I thought I could dig on because I was preparing for a meeting where I didn't want to just chuck it out. And then I realised there was a load of things in this document that I really thought were a bit problematic for me as a youth worker. So I started collecting the yin and the yang. Yeah? All these stuff I got really excited. Young people need to have opportunity to be responsible for their own decisions. Help young people to make informed choices. Put young people in control of things. Give young people a real voice in decision making. I'll get that excited about this document. But then of course on other pages, and wonderfully, sometimes on the same page, help young people to make the right choice. Of course, that's the assumed superiority of adults as to what the right choice is. Yeah, we would expect teenagers to go out and take part in more positive, not talking about positive activities, the assumed superiority of adults as to what is right and what is positive. Now, of course, that's all actually kind of philosophically wonderful because we find ourselves in an extraordinary philosophical conundrum as youth workers. We want to support young people's choices, we want to help them to make informed choices, but equally there are those who say, you know what, I've made these choices. These are my choices. If I'm 12 and I want to go to sleep with a 25-year-old, that's my lookout, isn't it? Yeah? So that puts us in a real wonderful philosophical place. And we've got the philosophical capacity to deal with that. I mean, certainly, you know, that's a challenge. That is a challenge. But, you know, it ain't either or, is it? There's a lot of messy stuff there that we really need to support each other in thinking about. But of course that, there's the language of control from adults. Perhaps it's even childish. And, you know, the favourite terms of new outreach work, in a sense, chime equally, yeah? Bernardo's, well, I'll cut that one out. But actually, Bernardo's quite interesting because they actually really quite pro these potentially childish positions. I ought to not get onto that, or I'm in a lot of trouble. But, and so back to testimony. This actually is what got me interested in this. I'm just sat there eating cornflakes or whatever, trying to sort my life out. And I heard this on Radio 4, and this was a guy who didn't even want to give his name. I still don't know who he was. But I found out enough to know that he was one of these youth workers in this place. And this is what he said: we repeatedly fail, to help, to support, to mitigate, to prevent, because we fail to make that critical relationship with those children. If we don't have that relationship, well, where I come from, we say it's our bollocks, right? And we're good at spending a lot of time in meetings. Yeah, it's just futile. All that resource just wasted because you haven't got the most important thing of all, and it's a history of our language. But actually, if you want a bit of evidence, the reports are there. And also, again, wonderfully for Detached Youthwork, the concept of whereabouts, the geography of it. Yeah. Now, the youth worker in the youth centre, colleagues in arms, they're not aware. It's not their job to be aware of the whereabouts of young people. But the young, the youth worker, the detached worker, the outreach worker, the street worker, moving around, using their mobilities in their communities, they're the ones who can get a handle on the whereabouts and mobilities and movements of young people. And what's extraordinary again about this documentation is that this evidence, it was the youth workers who were collecting it way before the police. Everybody thinks the police know everything. It's not true. Yeah? First in line in terms of evidence gathering. So, really extraordinary evidence of good engagement, that's an important tool. And then, of course, they've got a participative methodology, consulting, talking, listening to people, both children and their parents, keeping them informed, all that kind of messy stuff of what democratic activity is. And it seems to have been really effective. That's the difference of it. Yeah? Being accessible. Compare that, this, let's name it, this kind of low threshold thing, when actually what happens in practice, more now than ever before, is high threshold. Yeah? You don't get to go to the doctors until you've had your head bitten off by a tiger. Do you know what I mean? It's got to be bad before you're going to get a social work looking. High threshold against low threshold. Interesting to find that the evidence is it was that low threshold, easily accessible stuff that was working most effectively. So that adds a bit of texture to our discussion upstairs about the rationale, the reasonableness of targeted work as against more open access work. Get in there. Right, I think I've only got a couple of words here. Visibility. Seeing what's going on and making the thing visible to others who don't go on the street, who don't look, who don't observe. We've got responsibilities, duties to make, to make the invisible visible. Yeah? Because that is part of the preventative mentality, getting quick. Accessibility comes up again, reaching out, outreach work, street work, detached youth work. This needs to be done in ways that young people will engage with and trust. Don't we bloody know it, yeah? And this is evidence of that. A couple more, right? A bit about temporalities. But of course, you look at the realities. Short-term work. You're affected. We've got 1 or 2 group sessions for you. You don't need any more than that, do you? Right? However, Alexis J says, you're having a laugh. What did he say? I said that. The presumption should be, that's a moral statement, the presumption should be that a child and his family are likely to need sustained support over a considerable period of time. You've got to have the longer term stuff in if it's going to be effective. Got to have it in. Cases were closed prematurely, that's another kind of temporality. Longer term intervention is where it's at. Because even if you get through it all, There's the legacy, the trauma that needs dealing with. And then, of course, to relate back to what I talked to you about last year, the modern day reality of the heavy demands of performance management and data collection. And sometimes I worry that I'm just off the head, I am. But actually, I read a document every now and again, and I think, have a bit of faith in yourself, Graeme, you know, because what you've dug out, maybe it is true. Look, they reported difficulties in reconciling the outcome of numeric scoring systems with their professional judgment. The numbers didn't compute. The boxes you've got to tick about whether they're at risk or not. They didn't compute for people who knew intimately what was going on. In philosophy, we replace that with practical wisdom. Practical wisdom. The Detached Youthwork as philosopher. I did tweet this actually. Yeah. Exegesis report 16 Rotherham reveals flawed culture of numeric measurement of risk and its disregard of practical wisdom. And I've got one favourite, so there is somebody who thinks bring it on, one favourite, who's my mouth? Don't worry, I'm nearly there. Right. Just a couple. They were a bloody nuisance, these youth workers. Bring it on. Be a nuisance, that's what I say. It's your duty to be a nuisance. And my word, 9.4, all the references are there, so you can help me. This approach, an outreach approach, a street work approach, a detached youth work approach, was based on community development principles. That is, if you don't know what that is, it started where the young person was, it concerned itself with the whole person and addressed issues that the young person brought to the relationship. It did not prescribe or direct. Its success depended upon the skills of the individual worker and the level of trust which young people were willing to commit to. Its operations could be volatile, I'm laughing now, unpredictable, and even risky. Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Positive risk. Yeah, I just made that up. Right. Interesting. I'll just leave it to consider on that 1 second. Or otherwise, just get rid of all the youth workers, transfer them into children's social care. Transition to the status of client. But of course, then the youth grow pocket rate out of this. Right. We're not doing it. Evidence of what works. Or, as Alexis J concludes rather poetically, working in a way that entirely misses the point. Like that, no, right? Forget that, it's too long, right? Smithy taught me, my God, it made his life a misery. Right? It made my life a misery, I was a nuisance, right? But, well, in conclusion, of course, retain integrity and discretion. That means being a bit sceptical about the data. Right? Not dissing data. Right? I've done that speech already. Resisting bureaucratisation and managerialism. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah. Trust and practical wisdom. If you haven't got any, get some. Right? And as ever, you go back to the youth if you want to keep real. Because that's what I say. Know who I really am. Don't judge me by what's on paper. How many boxes somebody ticked on me. Yeah. Judge me for who I am. It's a human project. And if there was any hope in government, ironically, it's this. I'm concluding now. It's, she's got it badly wrong. I mean, she might be shitting herself, she's going to lose a job or something. But, amazing what's happened here. Forget the mighty deciding who's going to be the person who undertakes this inquiry, she's going to talk to the survivors and she's going to negotiate, she's going to have a dialogue about how we're going to do this. There's a new idea. Yeah, I mean, this guy reckons, actually, this is fascinating. This could be a new type of politics. It's an interesting kind of politics because it's a politics of participation. It's a politics of decision making with ordinary people. I don't know whether this might represent something. It's a big deal. I'm optimistic. You have to be optimistic. But look, you know, a new way of doing things. So I've got some hope for this. And of course, the young people, an example from Salford, yeah, from Coffey's report, just help them stand up for themselves. They stand up pretty well as well. The Salford stuff. Right? Yeah, the language that people speak. You know, people saying, I shouldn't have to live like this. Yeah? I want to enjoy the street without feeling intimidated. Or, just do something simple. I like Zoe Williams actually, I follow her on Twitter. Right? I like her a lot. And she gets over some stuff. And basically, like me, she thought Jade Chapman was a bit of a numpty. Right? And she said, I'll take my kids. I'll do it deliberately. I'll take the kids to the art gallery. And they had a good time. They had a good time. And in so doing, her, as a mother, and the countless other youth workers and detached youth workers who've taken young people to the gallery, they were doing something important, doing something simple, something not particularly intellectual, but something that was profoundly anti-childish and defending a position in which it's unreasonable that adults think they are superior to the people. There we go, it's me this year.